Greetings in Christ Jesus. I am just thrilled to join you in this video marking the 100th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of St. Aloysius Church in Bowling Green. This video will explore the events that led up to the building of the church and the subsequent decades of its history. But first, I'd like to travel even further back in time to share with you the inspirational life of the patron of the parish, St. Aloysius de Gonzaga. On March 9th, 1568, Luigi Gonzaga was born into a powerful, wealthy, aristocratic family in Renaissance Italy. Luigi was the eldest son and therefore his parents' hope for the future. But he discerned early that his future plans were at odds with his parents' wishes. Luigi's piety and love for God were evident from the age of 7 onward. By 16, Luigi decided to become a Jesuit. The following year, his father finally gave in, permitting Luigi to renounce his inheritance and to enter the Society of Jesus. Aloysius, familiarly known, of course, as Luigi, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in 1587. Only a few years later, a plague broke out in Rome. Aloysius volunteered to care for the sick, and he in turn became ill himself. After such a short life so dedicated to God, Aloysius was not afraid of death. He died in 1591 at just 23 years old. By giving up a literal fortune to pursue a life of holiness, Aloysius, since his canonization in 1726, has been a rich example and inspiration for countless young people around the world. In fact, he's the patron saint of Catholic youth. Now to your church. Among the more striking aspects of St. Aloysius Church are the sacred images painted in the apse in the sanctuary. The very artist who rendered these was the same one who depicted the sacred images in the apse of the sanctuary of our Holy Rosary Cathedral. What a providential sign of the unity of your parish church with the mother church of our diocese. As you celebrate the rich history of your parish and the splendid beauty of your church, I hope and pray the dedication and devotion of the parishioners whose sacrifices serve to build your historic church will inspire your sacrifices in striving for greater holiness in your own lives, dedicating yourselves more faithfully to the Lord and building up His church in your local parish. Please be assured of my prayerful good wishes on this joyful occasion of the 100th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of St. Aloysius Church. St. Aloysius Gonzaga, pray for us.
Bowling Green was first settled in 1832, and our town grew slowly because of its location in the Great Black Swamp. We were located right in the middle of an absolutely terrifying wilderness that blocked out this entire section of Northwest Ohio. People were moving west, but there was this great big swamp in their way.
The land was hard to clear and drain, and passable roads through the soft mud of the swamp were few and far between. Horses would get stuck up to their knees in the mud, and there were far more wolves, coyotes, snakes, and mosquitoes than Catholics.
Over time, the settlers would find their way through the knee-deep mud and the water. until they finally decided to clear the swamp and make it livable. In the pre-Civil War era, occasionally a priest would make his way to Bowling Green to minister to the needs of the small Catholic population in the area. But that was very sporadic. Slowly, the population began to grow as more families moved to the area.
It was 1861. The Civil War had begun. I was a widow with 2 young girls, and our small group of Catholic families first met at my home. We would meet whenever time allowed. We had no leader, and maybe every other month or so, a traveling priest from Cincinnati would stop and perform Mass. So, we just took turns reading and discussing the Bible.
The Burns home was located on Church Street, just 300 feet south of the town hall, which is now the police station. Today, the location where the house stood is now part of the parking lot behind the stores on Main Street.
Other families beside ours hosted the Masses over the years. Most notably, the Lawrence Sater family, who lived in a log cabin at the far east end of Wooster Street, and the Timothy Lawler family, who lived on Summit Street south of where the church was built. Mr. Lawler, he was a Civil War veteran who returned to Bowling Green after being wounded and disabled while in action. The last place we would gather was the Herman Wieben home, located on the 2nd floor over his business on South Maple Street. Mass was set up there until 1881, when the first church was built. As a result of our efforts, Bowling Green was designated as a station attached to St. Joseph's Church in Maumee. We finally had a priest assigned to say Mass here.
In 1861, I began making the first somewhat regular visits to Bowling Green Station and performed the first Mass at the Burns family home. The trip was treacherous and took about 3 hours each way with the horse and carriage, or on horseback when the trails were almost impossible to navigate. Then I would stay in their home overnight before returning home the next day. The Germans, French, and Irish were the 3 most prominent ethnic families in Bowling Green. They would try to have me commit to staying with one of their families whenever I would be scheduled to come to Bowling Green.
In 1863, the responsibility for our Bowling Green station was moved to St. Rose in Perrysburg. The first priest to come here to Bowling Green from Perrysburg was Father Charles Griss. These priests would provide religious leadership for our small group of Catholics until 1865, when the responsibility for our Bowling Green Station parish was shifted to a succession of pastors from St. Patrick's in Grand Rapids.
It was during my time that the first railroad ran from Perrysburg to Bowling Green, making it possible for me to make the trip more often, not concerned with the weather. I also led the first discussion about building a church in Bowling Green. However, it was decided that there weren't enough Catholics and still too poor to undertake such a project, so I continued to perform Mass in private homes.
In 1880, Bowling Green graduated from being a station to becoming a mission with a full-time priest.
I became the first full-time priest for Bowling Green, and we were successful in raising the money to purchase the land to build a church. Before we made our choice, we looked at other sites in Bowling Green. One area on the corner of Poe Road, where the Church of Christ stands, was favored by some parishioners. Another site that was favored by some was on Oak Street, just off Main Street. Ultimately, we decided on the corner of Clough and South Enterprise, and the church was built at the cost of $2,500. The lumber was harvested on the farms of the parishioners and brought into the Bigelow family sawmill next door to be cut for construction. The bricks were made by a parishioner, but one setback occurred when it was discovered the first bricks were flawed, and all of them had to be removed after 5 layers had been laid by the brick masons. The interior was in keeping with the exterior. The furnishings were very simple, and the hand-hewn benches, also made by the parishioners, served as pews. Such things as side altars and statuettes were many years away.
Once the 35-foot by 50-foot building was finished, Father Collip and his councilmen, the so-called patriarchs of the church, debated for weeks about the name of our church. With thousands of saints to choose from and 13 people trying to make the decision, it was becoming a real issue.
There was a lot of discussion, and we couldn't come to a decision. So I suggested that everyone write their first names down on pieces of paper and put them in a hat. The name drawn would become the church's name. When the name of Aloysius Pfeiffer was pulled out, our church officially became St. Aloysius.
With the new church finished, Bishop Gilmore from Cleveland attended the dedication in the fall of 1880. The congregation continued growing, along with the town of Bowling Green. I recall Father George Lemming especially. He had a voice that was described as a tornado baritone that threatened to loosen the windows of the church when he sang. There was never a need for an organ to sustain the pitch when he led the congregation in hymn singing.
In the late 1880s, we finally succeeded in building a two-room rectory next door to the church. This house was occupied by the priest and all the succeeding shepherds when they would visit Bowling Green from Providence. No longer did the French and the Germans and the Irish compete to see who would provide the best lodging for the priest to stay overnight. By 1890, Father Michael Philippart became the pastor of St. Patrick's, with Bowling Green still labeled a dependent mission. With the discovery of natural gas deposits in the area, Bowling Green population grew to 3,521. At that time, our town had 3 newspapers, 6 churches, 2 banks, and several manufacturing businesses.
During these years, it was obvious that the Bowling Green Parish had bypassed Providence. I was successful in making the argument to the diocese that resulted in switching the Providence Church and make it a mission to St. Al's. The pastoral residence was expanded and ready for occupancy, and I became the first resident pastor in Bowling Green.
By 1894, our church membership had grown to 65 families, and Father William Kress was our spiritual leader.
It was apparent that our congregation was outgrowing the size of the original church. So in 1894, we built an addition to the back end of the building that added another 30 feet of space for parishioners to worship in.
Later that year, Reverend Schreiner replaced Father Kress. At that time, our German families had wanted a bell for the church, and the French families had favored a parish cemetery. Eventually, it was the Irish families who swung the vote, and a bell tower with a new bell that weighed 2,000 pounds was purchased and installed. That bell would remain there until it was moved to the new church building in 1926. Another improvement was the addition of stained glass windows that surrounded the church with their beauty. When the church was first constructed, it was too expensive to consider stained glass, so colored paper was taped to each window to make it seem more church-like. Each of the new windows cost the enormous sum of $8 when they were purchased. We also improved the entrance to the church to welcome all that came to worship in our building.
In 1899, I had arranged with the Sisters of Notre Dame of Cleveland to staff the school we wanted to start. Unfortunately, we had some proud ethnic parishioners balking at the idea of having German sisters teaching their children, and that put the talk of the school to an end.
In 1903, under the leadership of Father Bergen, our congregation paid $200 for a new set of stations made in Munich, Germany, and made other improvements to the church building.
It was a wonderful day for our church when the new stations were dedicated July 12th. The interior of the church has been transformed into a beautiful and inviting auditorium. The walls are now bright and cheerful and bring out the beauty of the stained glass windows. The new stations are real works of art and will serve a noble purpose in the service of our church.
Also attending the dedication that day were a group of the Knights of St. John. They were present in full uniform and received Holy Communion as a body. It was a glorious day for our congregation of St. Aloysius.
Father Lane came to us in 1909 and found that our small parish had a surplus of $3,500. In July 1910, according to the local newspaper, a new organ was installed in the church. There are no known pictures of this new organ. The musical performances that night were beautiful, and all the performers made the evening truly memorable.
There were many things that needed to be done in our church when I first came to St. Aloysius. That surplus went to putting on a new roof and purchasing the new organ. It also paid for the remodeling and refurnishing of the rectory and making it more livable. My time in Bowling Green was very satisfying, except for the one nagging problem. There was a series of ongoing meetings of hate and racist groups in the little town of Portage. The radical prejudice and anti-Catholic bigotry was very difficult to deal with and continued until I left Bowling Green.
When I was called to St. Aloysius, the bigotry was still rampant. Although most of the KKK's hate was aimed at the Negroes, their hate extended to immigrants, Catholics, and Jews. These feelings were fanned by the local newspaper and some local businessmen. I found it necessary to call to everyone's attention the injustices of the Sentinel that were the most bitter and unfair to the Catholic Church. One of my proud accomplishments was setting up regular classes in Portage every Wednesday at 4:30 to instruct the youth from outside of Bowling Green. Unfortunately, my time at St. Aloysius ended in 1917 when I was inducted into the United States Army.
What began slowly in 1914 with the establishment of the new university in Bowling Green continued to grow during Father O'Toole's time at St. Aloysius. With the growth of the university came the increase of the number of Catholics looking for a church home. By 1917, when he left for the Army, our congregation had grown to almost 100 families, and it was becoming clear that the original church building was inadequate for these additional people.
One of the first things Father Goebel did after arriving at St. Aloysius was to begin raising money to purchase the Bigelow property. That lot was adjacent to the lot our small church and rectory were built on.
At the time we purchased that lot, the family owned a house and a sawmill that had been used to cut the lumber for our church when it was built in 1881. The property was cleared of the buildings, and we started in earnestly planning for the new church.
Father Goebel was highly respected by the townspeople and the university, but the continuing encounters with the anti-German and anti-Catholic groups in the area remained a problem during his tenure at St. Al's. The parish suffered a real loss with the departure of Father Goebel in 1923. The plans for our new church were well underway, and the fundraising was well over $35,000. John T. Combs, whose work also included the Rosary Cathedral in Toledo, was the chief architect. Unfortunately, Mr. Combs died of cancer before the project was completed. His partner, William G. Perry, is listed as the architect. Groundbreaking for the new building was April 24th, 1924.
It was quite a challenge to join a project that had been in the works for many years. Trying to get the cost of the new structure down to a manageable amount was very difficult, and there had to be severe cuts in some areas, but we got it done.
The construction was coming along nicely, and the laying of the cornerstone was scheduled for June 29th, 1924. It was an exciting time for the congregation to seeing the results of years of planning actually happening. That day in Bowling Green, the weather was threatening, so I'm sure it held down the number of parishioners attending, but it was still a large crowd. We gathered at the original church building on Enterprise. We were led by 27 clergy and Father Bushcool, and a procession down Clough Street to Summit, where we entered the construction area.
The cornerstone was placed in the northeast corner of the building, and the people in the procession strained to get a view as Father J.T. O'Connell, representing the Toledo Diocese, spoke to the attendees.
The Catholic Church is ever ready to guide the human soul in every emergency in life, even to the very doors of eternity. The building of this church in Bowling Green is for the good of the community, and it could not be built in a fairer city. It is to be a temple befitting the worship to which it is dedicated.
Father O'Connell complimented Father Goebel on his work and Father Bushkuhl on his labors in building the church. Then the cornerstone was blessed.
Everything that is good has its beginning in you, O God. We humbly beg of you to provide that this work, begun for the glory of your name, may be brought to completion through Christ our Lord.
Then the mortar was placed on the stone in the form of a cross before a winch lifted the heavy stone into position and lowered onto its permanent spot. At that time, Father turned his attention to the walls and blessed the walls of the new church before the ceremony closed.
Almighty and eternal God, be pleased to dwell in this place now dedicated to your name, and to bless us who have gathered together to give this place and ourselves to you this day. Let this house and every part of it be used to glory you. O God, let it be devoted to your service.
2 years later, the new church building was dedicated by Bishop Samuel Stritch of the Toledo Diocese. We had been using the church since February, but now it would be official. The dedication services began with 50 Knights of St. John's from Tiffin leading the procession, followed by 25 priests, 10 altar boys, then Bishop Stritch. They moved from the rectory to the front entrance of the church. After the prayer, the exterior of the building was blessed. Then, as the interior was being blessed, the litany of the saints was being chanted by the priest, and the procession stopped at the foot of the high altar, and solemn high mass began.
Father Bushkuhl did a wonderful job celebrating the Mass, and it was special that Father Goebel acted as the deacon. A specially built purple draped throne for the bishop was placed to the left of the sanctuary. It was Father Goebel who delivered the sermon, and his words were certainly very meaningful and memorable to all of us.
A church building should follow a design and be constructed so it cannot be mistaken for any other kind of building. This church is built in such a way that it stands for the principles and the ideas embroidered in its design. The interior should be restful, with an atmosphere of prayer, lifting the minds heavenward. This is a magnificent building, beautiful and grand, because the people of St. Aloysius Parish sacrificed for every stone, brick, and timber. It is the door of heaven, the place of salvation, the house of God.
At the close of the Mass, the bishop spoke for a short time, gave the papal blessing, which was followed by the benediction of the Most Blessed Sacrament. The procession again formed and marched from the church while the Holy God was sung. Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before thee.
But the church was not finished. A renowned American painter who specialized in church murals, Felix Leiftucker, had a working relationship with the architect John Combs and was hired to paint the inside of the church. There is no record of exactly when Mr. Leiftucker began or finished the project, but it was truly a masterpiece when finished. The murals stayed untouched for 30 years, but in the 1960s, it was decided to cover them in paint.
So the million dollar question is, who painted over the murals and why?
When Father Hartman was here, he was the one that got the idea to paint the church, that ecru color or off-white or whatever, and paint it over everything up there.
There was damage from the soot of all those candles, because at that time the altar was facing the wall and the mural, and there was somebody told me, and I had a picture, that there was soot damage on the pictures. Now it's starting to make more sense.
The original church continued to be used as a meeting hall for St. Aloysius from 1925 to 1959. The number of families grew to 500 by 1944, and we had to look to the future once again. We bought several properties on South Summit with the thought of building an elementary school.
The Newman Club membership was growing by leaps and bounds when I first came to Bowling Green as an associate pastor in 1952. By 1956, it was decided that St. Al's was just not big enough to handle its own parishioners and all the students who wanted to worship. We purchased property on Thurston Avenue, immediately adjacent to the university, and built a chapel. The building was done by student volunteers, and we held our first Mass there on October 19th, 1958.
One thing about Father Oliver that most of the congregation didn't know, when he did the sermon, he always took off his shoes. He'd stand at the pulpit, take off his shoes, and slip on.
Why would he do that?
He was comfortable that way.
That's funny.
In 1956, I arrived in Bowling Green. There were plans in the works for building a school on site, connecting with the church, and a lot of decisions had to be made. The decision to build the school necessitated other actions. First, we purchased several lots on Enterprise and Summit Streets to have room to build and to provide adequate parking. Perhaps the most difficult decision, even though there was no real alternative, was tearing down the original church to make room for the school. The building was originally built in 1881 and had served our parish 78 years. There are a lot of memories in that building that must have come to the surface as we watched a crane and heavy equipment bring the building down. The work on the new building went up quickly, and the first classes were held in the new addition in September 1960, with 86 students in the first 3 grades.
To have our new school completed and in operation is one of the greatest achievements of our parishioners here at St. Aloysius. Our women's group raised over $4,000, and the men's group, the Holy Name Society, raised another $3,500 towards the construction cost.
As soon as the school was finished and opened, we turned our attention to the rectory. The building we were using was first built in 1884 and has been in use since then. It needed several upgrades that would have cost a lot of money to do, so we decided just to build a new rectory in its place. Once again, it is never easy to do a project that has so many memories in it. The house had seen many changes and was a lot bigger than the original rectory when it was constructed. The other big project we did in 1963 was building a convent for the sisters who taught in the school. By 1968, there were 338 students enrolled in St. Aloysius.
Father Joseph Hartman died of a heart attack on October 10th, 1968, ending his service at St. Aloysius after 12 years. 1 month later, Father Fred Neatfeld returned to the parish where he had served as an associate pastor from 1946 until 1952. Guiding the school additions through to completion now became his task, and the directives of Vatican II were also implemented, resulting in changes to the church itself as well as in the liturgies. The church was modernized. The statues were removed, the altar moved away from the back of the sanctuary so that the priest could face the congregation during Mass. The walls and ceiling were painted over, and the large wooden crucifix from Germany was moved into the choir loft and replaced with a large wooden screen. As in many other parishes, some of the changes were difficult to accept and were met with some dissension among parishioners.
The biggest thing that I think the most complaints that parishioners had, when Father Neatfeld was here, was when they decided to turn the altar around and take down the crucifix. Well, I know everybody was glad to see it when it went back up on the altar.
Being here as an associate made the transition easier, but 16 years had passed. So many things had changed, and there were still more changes to deal with. But parishioners were so helpful and understanding about the circumstances of my return. My biggest challenge was paying off the debt from the tremendous building program from previous years. We completed the school additions in 1969, including more classrooms and a gymnasium which provided more space for school and parish events, and was named in memory of Father Hartman.
When Father Thomas Leland came to St. Aloysius, our 60-year-old building was starting to show signs of aging. 3 keystones in our archway were in danger of collapsing. Another major problem was a crack at the top of the inside 2 walls that ran the entire length of the church. At the same time, the mortar and the bell tower and the other areas of the exterior brick had to be taken care of. And the Knights of Columbus put in a ramp in 1989 for the physically challenged.
This was my longest pastorate in my priesthood. I was here for 14 years at St. Aloysius and grew to love the people and the community and the many good things that have happened and continue to happen here. I would mention, first of all, that the organ project, I had been told, was something that had been wanted for a number of years here at St. Aloysius, maybe back in the late 60s already, and for whatever reason it never materialized, but fortunately in the late 90s we were able to bring this to fruition. One of my memories of the project was when finally we signed the contract, which looked as if it was going to be something almost overwhelming, but we had had a little fundraiser after the committee was going for a time, and we had about $50,000. It looked as if we could use toward this project of $355,000. But one Saturday evening I was here at the church at the end of the Mass, and one of the ushers came up to me and said, I want you to stop to talk to my aunt before you leave tonight. She's in one of the front pews where she often sat. And when I approached her, she said, Father, I want to give you something toward the organ project. At least that's my preference. And she handed me stock, which was worth about $53,000 at the time, which took us, of course, over the $100,000 mark. And it seemed as if from that time on, perhaps the organ project would be a reality. I have many memories of the organ project. One when the people of the parish were asked to help bring the organ in, it was assembled completely at the builders in Canada, and brought here. It was really interesting because it was so carefully brought in that the last piece to be placed in the organ was placed here, and then everything moved back. And all the pews were covered with pipes and various things. We had not to use the church for a couple of weeks because of the organ project as it was being assembled once again.
We'd be back in the sacristy waiting, and he wouldn't be there. And somebody would say, well, I'll go over and check on him. And maybe he'd be basting a turkey, or he had a cake in the oven that he couldn't come to church to start Mass till that cake was out of the oven, and it was taking longer than it was supposed to, because he fixed dinner every Sunday for his mother, who lived in Parish. And so we'd say, oh, that Mass is going to be late starting because Father's making cake.
When Father Ed Schleter came to St. Al's, he came with his own set of ideas, some popular and some that were difficult for the parish to accept.
Well, I was there from 99 until 2007. I was there for 8 years. Probably one of the biggest things with St. Al's was, through the years, the evolving relationship with St. Thomas More. Originally, St. Thomas More was a Newman club.
Right.
From St. Al's. Father Oliver would have been, I think, the beginning of that. And then it evolved into a parish. So it went from a Newman club into a parish, and then it became 2 parishes in Bowling Green. People sure had a variety when they went from Needfeld to Gorman to Leland to Schleter to Davis. Although I felt like Father Davis carried on a lot of what I had been trying to do.
I am not naturally an administrator. And I just really feel I was so blessed in Bowling Green because the fit was so perfect. Because Father Ed Schleter, I could not have followed a better pastor for me. He got everything organized, and he got lay people, and he had a maintenance committee, he had people to lock up church. There were all of these men. He started the parish retreat.
In terms of building projects, I didn't do any building. Did purchase some properties while I was there, and just next to Worcester, there were 3 little houses that we bought, and those were torn down and eventually became part of the parking. I moved the staff from what used to be the convent, which was the far north end of the building.
Right.
I moved them into the what was the rectory, and I moved out of the rectory. Well, I think each pastor needs to move the furniture. I think it's like the wife when she comes into a new home, to take possession of it. She can't just leave the furniture the way it was. Well, probably true of men, probably true of pastors when they come in.
Yeah.
They probably have to do something. Although I tried to avoid that because I was well aware of the image that when Father so-and-so died, what do they remember him for? His buildings. I was bound to determine that wouldn't be what I'd be remembered for. What I appreciated was having someone follow me that I valued his view of church, his view of ministry, and his pastoral person. I would say being a college town will always make it unique. The educated laity, the students, lots of good folks. Good maintenance committee, good finance people, good spiritual, I remember the retreats a little better.
In 2007, Father Ed left, and we welcomed Father Mark Davis to the parish. I will never forget standing next to his 6'7" frame, being engulfed in one of his bear hugs and laughter.
I started as pastor July 1st in 2007. Now, the very first Sunday Mass, that might have been Saturday night, might have been the first. I can't remember, but I know that first Saturday night Mass, it was 90 million degrees, in church, but it was 80 some degrees outside, and it was hotter than blazes. People started, just in these first 2 or 3 years, just as I was getting to know everybody, then I started to be able to see the pictures of the murals that used to be in the church. and everybody was aware of it, and there were 5 layers of aqua green, seafoam green lime paint over these beautiful murals. So the mural was maybe 40 years old at that time, but there was damage. So it needed to be redone. But they had no idea where they could get any artist other than going to Vienna, to be able to do the work.
So we have 5 layers of overpaint that we're trying to get down to the original and then reinstate that artwork and bring it back to its original look in this church. What we're doing is stripping the paint, and we're very fortunate that the original paint is very strong. So we're using a water-based stripper and scraping it off. We're doing about 2 applications. One breaks down 2 layers. The next step will break down the rest of it, and it's a lot of scrubbing, scraping, but we're cutting through with all of it with water, which we're very fortunate. So we don't have to use any harsh chemicals. Look, here's a face, here's a hand, look at this, and we all share with each other, what we're discovering, and come over here and look at that. So it's great. It's great to see everybody through the church being so excited, and we're revealing and showing and sharing, and it's the best, it really is.
There are certain times when priest and community really fit well that are magical times. I mean, and it's just, I will never have a run like that, but we were so blessed. Because church is always good, because it's always a vehicle to get us to God. But I just feel very blessed that we had those years together.
In his 12 years at St. Aloysius, Father Mark accomplished a great deal, and the congregation decided to name the new narthex in his honor. In 2019, the diocese assigned Father Tom McQuillan to be the leader of the St. Aloysius faithful.
When Father Tom came to St. Al's in 2019, he immediately began attending small group meetings in the homes of parishioners. That was so he could get to know the community, and more importantly, so the community could get to know him.
Well, when I first came in, we decided to have these gatherings to meet and greet. Different parishioners hosted the various gatherings, and it gave me a chance to meet some of the parishioners and get to know them and answer questions or let them bring up concerns that they had. I had spent a summer here back in maybe about 1993, so about 30 years ago, as a student to study under Dr. Pobzik, a parishioner here. So I knew a little bit about St. Al's from Leland's days. Did not know much since, other than that my classmate Mark Davis had been my predecessor for 12 years. Every time coming into a new group, there's a lot of curious eyes on you. And so there might have been a little bit of nerves, but I knew I had a good homily in terms of introducing myself and making that comment about being shorter than Father Mark.
I'll never forget that comment. Never. It caught everybody totally off guard.
Yes. Yeah. Was getting to know people, getting into the routine of parish life, different committee meetings, and celebrating masses and weddings and funerals. And then COVID hit. That was March of 2020 that we closed the school and closed the church for a couple months and had to make a quick change to doing things virtually. We videotaped the masses and kept improving our system so that now we can live stream any Mass fairly easily. And then as time progressed and we realized it was time to start opening up, we did that slowly also, inviting people to come back in small groups and adding a Mass where we asked the people at that additional Mass to follow all the protocols and wear the mask and so on. And bit by bit we opened things up, the same with the school. We tried to follow the protocols at first with the social distancing and wearing of masks, and made some of the classroom sizes adjustments because of trying to keep that distance. And of course, as we learned more about the virus and the regulations eased, we also adjusted with that and are pretty much back to the normal routine now. There were some plans that I've seen going back to Father Ed about different improvements to the campus, calls for a main entry. Under Father Mark, with the building of the narthex, there were some other studies done, and one of the final things apparently that Father Mark and the Finance Council had done was to order an engineering inspection of Clare Hall, and I received that report, to my surprise, in November of 2019, and the report concluded that the building's sound and worth keeping. So then the question became, what do we want to do with it? The diocese also was doing their capital campaign, Living Christ, and we were given the option of piggybacking upon their efforts. So we did that because then the diocese was picking up a lot of the bills for a lot of the cost of the capital campaign, and also doing a lot of the work. And we did the fundraising starting in August of 2022. And over the course of about 6-8 months, we received over 4.5 million in pledges. And our goal was 4.5 million, so we surpassed our goal a bit. Of course, now we're in the collecting of the pledges and trying to finalize the plans. We're hoping here in April of 2024 to break ground and start some of the work.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
This may be a dream of mine, but the hope would be that we could probably finish before school resumes in August, September of 2025. And yeah, it may be a dream of mine to have that kind of timeline, but it should be possible. Well, other things that we've identified listening to the parishioners is a desire to have Hartman Hall and the kitchen off of Hartman Hall improved, both for functionality and appearance. So any extra money, God willing, we have extra money from this campaign, we'll go to making those improvements. We also continue to update each of the classrooms, improving the lighting and the ceilings in each one. So having a campus this big, there's always going to be the need for some kind of capital improvement. I hope by the time I get transferred that for my successor, that things are well left to them, that they get to enjoy more of it and only have to do the standard routine maintenance. St. Aloysius has grown from 12 families in 1860 to over 900 families currently. Under the guidance of the Toledo Diocese, we will continue to provide the spiritual leadership to the Catholic population in Northwest Ohio. There is so much more history that can be told, but for time constraints. But our website will include more of this information, including biographies of every one of the priests who have served our parish. There will be more information on the school and other organizations that are a vital part of our community. So check it out when you are able. May God continue to bless all of us with his love and mercy. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Aloysius, pray for us.